basically, after outlining the main features of our project, we could get to try to identify what lies behind the idea we presented. What we thought is that we all know that when discussing about the Security Council the UN reform, people focus on the Security Council and its membership, but they get stuck in geopolitical dynamics and in national interest-based conflicts. So we thought we would like to conjugate a very ambitious approach with a feasible approach. So we would like to go from a functionalistic approach, that's what we have today, where each UN agency is meant to address a specific set of problems without taking care of the specific regional features, to a different approach, which could be called territorial and integrated, where each local assembly would address the challenges faced by a very specific region, so by the territory, adopting a regional approach. So in order to do so, what we would need would be to provide the local assemblies, our new summits, our new fora, with very specific tasks and competencies. So first of all, we would like them to be held responsible for discussing governance-related issues. And there's a very simple reason for that, which is to say, if we agree on the fact that the added value of non-central government lies in them being closer to the citizens, thus being potentially more representative and or more effective in providing them with what they need, well, it's easier to understand why we would like them to be discussing these issues. On the other hand, there could be a fora, like a new forum, where to establish new partnership. And when I talk about new partnership, I mean innovative relationship involving new actors and new levels of governance. Third, I would say last but not least, because this is the core of our proposal, we would like the regions to take part in the formulation of action plans. Basically, we would like the UN and the General Assembly in particular to keep on fixing the priorities at the global level, but we would like the regions to decide how to implement them. And that's because if we think about global warming, for instance, just to give an example, it's easier to think about an African action plan than a global one. Of course, there's more uniformity and there are interests in common as well as traditions and characteristics. So what would we gain at the UN level? Well, first of all, the General Assembly work would be simplified, and that's because we would have a transfer of competencies, especially the governance-related one, to new bodies. Secondly, in order to make it happen, we would need to have a transfer of funds. And that's first of all because if we make the use of resources closer to the people, well, it could be more effective and probably fairer. But on the other hand, if we don't provide these new bodies with resources, if we don't decentralize the funds, well, they would be just summits. They would just, get to draft new declarations without being able to implement them. And what we would like would be these bodies to be able to implement them, especially at the local level by using decentralized cooperation and these new instruments of decentralized governance. Third, we would like to have a supervision ensured by UN officials and specialized agencies in order to have both legitimacy and competencies. So, of course, we think that this proposal could have some good perspectives, some potential capacities for the future. And that would be, first of all, to design a people-centered and integrated approach, giving voice to new actors, to local communities, both at the regional and at the international level. Then we think, well, at the beginning, my colleague was talking about representativeness and effectiveness. Well, we think that we could increase the UN representative profile, we could strengthen it. But also we could identify and involve representatives from local entities that are not represented at the moment. Let's think about Gaza. Let's think about the states where the national organization implodes, where we have conflicts, where it's difficult to identify who could easily and effectively represent the territory. Well, at the local level, it might be easier, or at least a little bit easier to identify someone to represent these entities that aren't represented or absent from the official scene, international scene. Well, of course, there are a lot of outstanding issues. There are a lot of problems to be solved and a lot of things that would need further reflection and thoughts, at least as far as we think. Well, the big potential capacity would be the one of involving new local entities, and that's what we think. But on the other hand, we think that we would need more time and further thoughts about how to identify delegates from very problematic areas of the world. And also the criteria to be used, because, well, we could think that local authorities have an added value because they're closer to citizens. So what shall we do? Should we choose democratically elected representatives, or should we adopt the criteria of people effectively having ruling territory, so having an authority? Because if we choose the first path, well, we would have a more democratic approach, but we would lose a lot of possibilities to make some of these entities talk. But on the other hand, if we choose just the criteria of authority, well, we would have an assembly full of dictators, and I don't know if I'm not sure that's what we want. Secondly, we would need to avoid possible duplications. What we had in mind was to simplify the work, especially of the General Assembly, and to have perspective for a more focused work. But of course, we should think about how to conjugate the work with the one of the ECOSOC and how to create links with non-state actors and civil society. So, well, as part of Generation 2020, to conclude, we think that localism opens up very good new perspective for the future. And especially we think that local governance, involving different levels of governance and giving voices to a lot of actors that are silent at the moment, could offer perspective for a new world order based on a new kind of multilateralism, multipolarism, and the multi-level dialogue and partnerships. And we could go even further in imagining possible scenarios for the future. Just to give an example, we could think about the local assembly as a way to establish a new diplomacy. And that's because there are a lot of places in the world where it's easier to think about bridging territories, universities, civil societies, local authorities, than to bridge governments. And there are also areas that lie within different countries and that would be easier to be represented in this way. And so, well, a possible perspective for the future could be the involvement of local entities in peacekeeping and peacebuilding and the crisis management. So basically, what we tried to say is that if the UN could be able to efficiently and effectively perform its functions and could get to increase its representativeness, it could respond to those who are questioning its legitimacy and right to exist, and we think that deserve it. Thank you for your attention.